I have kept the ledger of this pack for 31 winters. Births, deaths, the names of the dead so the living don't forget them. I have written down every wrong choice an alpha ever made, because somebody has to, and somebody has to be honest about it when the wrong choice goes and saves us all anyway. So let me be honest with you now, before I lose my nerve. The night Rourke carried that woman through our gate, I was the one holding the lamp. I was the one who told him to put her down in the snow and walk away. I said it in front of everybody. I said it loud. Leave her. The ones death overlooks come back to collect. And he looked at me, who used to bounce him on my knee when his father was still alive, and he said the only thing he ever said to me that I couldn't write down without my hand shaking. If you've ever loved something the whole world told you to let go of, stay with me. This is the story of the most stubborn thing I ever watched a man do. It's the story of how wrong I was. And it's the story of a woman named Tamsin, who walked into a place that hated her and did not flinch. I'm only telling it once, so listen. The first thing I noticed was the blood on his collar, and that it wasn't his. Rourke came down off the ridge trail at full dark with something slung across both arms, and the dogs in the lower pen started up before any of us could see him. I was at the long table in the meeting hall, doing what I always did at that hour, which was pretending to update the ledger so I'd have an excuse not to go to bed and lie there listening to my own bad knee. The pencil stub I use had worn down to almost nothing. I keep them till they're too small to hold. It's a habit. Marta used to laugh at me for it. Marta's been gone 11 years now, and I still keep the pencils too long, so make of that what you want. Anyway, the dogs. I heard the gate, and then I heard Joss shouting, and Joss does not shout. Joss is the kind of steady that makes you trust a man before you've decided to, so when his voice cracked across the hollow like that, half the settlement was at the doors before I'd gotten my coat off the hook. Rourke stood in the gate light with snow melting off his shoulders, and in his arms there was a woman. I want to be careful here because afterward everyone told it different and afterward everyone was a liar, including me. So here is exactly what I saw. I saw a woman who was not from here. You can tell. We carry ourselves a certain way, all of us who grew up in the valley, a kind of looseness in the shoulders that says the mountain is ours and we know it. She did not have that. Even half dead, even gone gray at the lips with cold, she held herself like someone braced for a blow. Her hands were curled up against her own chest, not reaching for him, not reaching for anyone. A person reaches when they want help. She'd stopped reaching a long time before Rourke found her. And she was thin in the way that frightens you. Not hungry thin. Survived thin. The kind of thin where you understand, looking at it, that the body has already eaten everything spare it had and started in on the parts it needs. She was at the Greywater line, Rourke said. He was breathing hard. He'd carried her a long way. Past the burn, she's the only one. And that was when the hall went quiet, because everyone there knew what Greywater meant. You have to understand what we'd lived through to understand why good people stood in that gate and wished a dying woman gone. 2 autumns before, the Grey came to the Greywater pack on the far side of the eastern burn. We are not close with them. We trade salt and we trade news, and once in a while we trade a son or a daughter who's fallen in love across the line, but we keep to ourselves and they keep to themselves, and that suited everyone. Then the Grey came. We don't have a clean word for it. The old ones call it Grey fever. The children just call it the Grey, the way you'd name a thing you were too scared to look at directly. It comes slow. It starts in the chest like an ordinary cough, and it ends with a person lying still and breathing shallow with their skin gone the color of wood ash. And in between there is a great deal of suffering that I will not describe to you, because some of it I watched later, and I have decided you don't need it. Greywater had 200 souls. By the spring after the Grey came through, the smoke we saw on that horizon was not their cook fires. You understand me. There was no one left to make cook fires. And we thought we had learned that the Grey traveled, that it rode in on a person the way a burr rides in on your trouser leg. We had turned away 2 families that winter, families we knew, families with children because they'd come from the wrong direction and we were so afraid. I wrote their names in the ledger under a heading I'd never used before or since. I won't tell you what I wrote. I'm not proud of it. We told ourselves it was wisdom. Fear always tells you it's wisdom. That's how you know it's fear. So when Rourke said Greywater and she's the only one, what the rest of us heard was, I have brought the Grey home in my arms. Put her down, I said. I said it before I'd thought it. It came up out of the same place the fear lived. Put her down, Rourke, out past the gate. We'll leave food, we'll leave a fire laid, but she does not come in. I expected, God help me, I expected him to argue, and then I expected him to listen, because that is how it had always gone between us. Rourke was 26 that winter. His father had been dead 3 years. I had stood at that man's pyre and promised him, in the way you promise the dead, that I'd keep his boy from doing anything that would get us all killed. An alpha who's grieving is an alpha who reaches for the biggest thing he can carry just to feel strong, and a half-dead stranger from a dead pack is a very big thing to carry. I thought I was keeping my promise. The hall was full of nodding. People wanted me to be right. People always want the cautious man to be right, because if he's right then they don't have to do anything hard. Rourke looked down at the woman in his arms. Then he looked at me. Her name is Tamsin, he said. Just that, her name is Tamsin. And here is the thing about a name. You can turn away a body. You can turn away a stranger, a survivor, a risk, a number. We'd done it. But the second he said her name out loud in that hall in front of all of us, he made it so that turning her away meant turning away Tamsin, and a person with a name is a person you have to answer for. He knew that. That's why he said it. He was 26 and grieving and stubborn as the stone the valley is cut from. But he was not stupid, and he had just made every one of us complicit in whatever happened next. I will give him that. It was the smartest cruel thing I ever saw a kind man do. She's burning up, Joss said quietly from the side. He'd come close enough to see. Rourke, she's not got the gray. The gray runs cold. This one's hot. This is just a woman who's been freezing to death. You can't know that, somebody said from the back, and somebody else agreed. And the murmur started building toward the kind of thing a frightened crowd does when it's decided to be brave by being merciless together. Rourke didn't shout over them. He did something worse for me. He walked. He walked across the hall, past the long table, past me and my lamp and my worn-down pencil, and he carried her to the hearth, the big one, the pack hearth, the one that's been burning since before my grandmother's time and is not supposed to go out. And he laid her down in front of it on the warm stones like she was the most ordinary thing in the world, like she belonged there, like there had never been any question. And he knelt and started chafing her hands between his. Nobody stopped him. That's the part I think about. We could have. There were 40 of us and one of him. But he was the alpha, and more than that, he had done the one thing none of us had the spine for, which was to decide. Fear can't move. It can only mill around. The second somebody decides, the fear has to choose whether to fight a decision or fall in behind it. And most of the time, most of us, we fall in behind, because deciding is exhausting and following is not. I stood there holding my lamp like a fool. Get the gray out of your heads, Rourke said low, not turning around. And somebody bring me broth and the good blankets, now. A woman near the door, Edna, who is sharp and was sharper then, said, and if you're wrong, if she's wrong and we wake up Gray. Rourke was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. Outside the dogs had finally settled. Then it'll be on me, he said. Write that down, Ansel. Whatever happens to her happens to me first. If she carries it, I'll have already caught it. Because I carried her 4 miles and I'll sit with her tonight. So nobody else has to be brave. I've done your being brave for you. I wrote it down. My hand was shaking. I told you it would be. Whatever happens to her happens to me first. That's the first line about Tamsin in the ledger. I've read it 100 times since. She didn't wake for 2 days. I know because I was there for a lot of it and not because I'd softened. I want to be clear about that. I sat in that hall because I decided that if the gray was going to start in our pack, it was going to start where I could write down the moment it began, the names and the hour, so that whoever came after us would at least know how it had happened. I sat there to keep the ledger of our ending. That's the truth of why I stayed. I am not telling you a story about a wise old man who saw the good in her right away. I'm telling you about a frightened one who stayed to take notes on a disaster. But you can't watch a person for 2 days and keep them a number. Rourke barely left. He'd doze in the chair with his chin on his chest and snap awake every time her breathing changed. The whole settlement walked soft around the hall those days, came to the door and looked and went away, the way people do at a sickbed when they can't decide if they're hopping or dreading. Children dared each other to peek. I caught little Wim, Joss's youngest, 6 then, staring at her through the gap in the door with his thumb in his mouth, and when I shoot him he said, "Is she the gray lady?" And I didn't have a good answer, so I said she was a lady who'd been very cold, and he thought about that and said, "I've been very cold," like it gave them something in common, and went away satisfied. Remember Wim. He matters later. On the second night her fever broke. I knew before Rourke did, because I'd been watching the sweat come up on her, which is the body finally finding something to fight with. She turned her head on the blanket and her eyes came open, and they were gray, not gray like the sickness, gray like a winter sky. That's a different gray entirely. I want you to know there's a difference. And the first thing she did, the very first thing before she'd worked out where she was or who we were or whether we meant to kill her, was lift one hand off the blanket and reach toward the fire. Toward the warmth, the reaching I'd said she'd stop doing. She'd started again. I don't know why that's the thing that undid me, but it's the thing that undid me. A woman who'd lost everything reaching out one more time, on the off chance the world might have something left to give her. Then she saw Rourke asleep in the chair, a stranger, a big man in a strange hall, and her whole body went tight and ready in a way that told you everything about what she'd survived to get here. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She gathered herself silent and careful and got ready to run or to fight, whichever the next second asked of her, and that quiet competence at the edge of terror was when I understood, sitting in the dark with my pencil, that whatever this woman was, she was not a curse. She was just somebody who'd lived when she shouldn't have, and was bracing for us to make her sorry for it. "You're safe," I said, because somebody had to, and Rourke was asleep, and I was the only one awake to be either kind or cruel, and I found to my own great surprise that I was going to be kind. She looked at me. She looked at the worn-down pencil in my hand and the ledger open on my knee. Her voice when it came was a ruin, 2 days dry barely there. "You write things down," she said. "I do." "Then write that I told you the truth." She wet her lips. It clearly cost her. "I don't have it. I had it. 2 winters past I had it, and it took my mother and my brothers and everyone, and it did not take me, and I have spent every day since wishing it had, and I do not have it now. Whatever your people think, I am not carrying it to you." Her eyes went hard and bright. "I came west because there was nothing east, that's all. I didn't come to bring you anything. I didn't come to take anything. I just couldn't stop walking. And then I couldn't walk anymore. And then there was a man, and now there's a fire, and I don't understand any of it, and I am too tired to understand it, so please, please just tell me whether I'm to live or not so I can stop being afraid of the answer. I have written a great many things in my life. I have never once been able to write down the silence that came after that." I closed the ledger. "You're to live," I said. "As far as I have anything to say about it, and I have more than most, you're to live." She didn't thank me. She put her head back down and she cried, finally, the way you cry when you've been holding it for 2 years, without sound. Just the shoulders, just the breath. And Rourke woke at the change in her breathing the way he always did, and saw her crying, and did not say anything wise or strong. He just moved his chair an inch closer and put his hand near hers on the blanket, not touching, just near, just there, the way you'd leave a door open without making someone walk through it. She didn't take his hand that night. But she didn't move hers away, either. I should tell you why I'd been so quick with the lamp and the put her down. It's not flattering, but you've trusted me this far, and you ought to know what kind of man was holding the light. The two families we turned away that bad winter, the ones whose names I wrote under the heading I won't repeat. One of them was my wife's cousin and her 3 girls. Marta had been gone 2 years by then, so I was the only family those girls had on this side of the burn, and they came up the ridge trail in a thaw with everything they owned on a hand sledge, asking for me by name at the gate. And I went out and I stood where Rourke later stood, and I looked at 3 children I'd held as bobbies, and I was so afraid of the gray that I told them no. I told them I'd send food. I told them the line was the line. The middle girl, Sepha, looked at me the way you'd look at a man you'd thought was good and had just learned wasn't, and they turned the sledge around and they went back down the trail into the dark, and I never heard another thing about any of them. Not one word. I don't know if they lived. I have spent 11 years not knowing, which is its own particular cold. So when I said leave her in the snow, you understand, I wasn't only afraid of the gray. I was afraid of being a man who turns children away, afraid that if I'd been right to do it to Sepha, I had to keep being right forever, because the alternative was that I'd sent my own blood off to die for nothing, and a man can't carry that and keep standing. Better the rule was wise. Better we were all wise together. You see how it works. The fear doesn't just make you cruel once. It makes you need to stay cruel, to keep the first cruelty from meaning what it meant. Tamsin reaching for the fire is what cracked it, because Sepha had reached for me that day at the gate. The youngest one had put her little hand out and I'd stepped back from it. And here was this stranger doing the same human thing 11 years later, and this time there was a man kneeling by the hearth who hadn't stepped back, who'd carried her 4 miles instead. And watching Rourke be the man I hadn't been, in front of the whole pack, with everyone telling him he was a fool. It was like being given the chance to answer for Sepha, second-hand, too late, but given to me all the same. I wasn't going to waste it twice. I never told Rourke that's why I turned. Let him think it was his speech. The young should be allowed to believe their words move men. Sometimes it's the men's own ghosts doing the moving, and the words just give the ghosts somewhere to stand. I'd like to tell you that was the end of the trouble, that the pack saw what I saw and softened the way I'd softened. They didn't. Of course they didn't. Fear that's had 2 winters to grow roots doesn't come up because one old man closed his ledger. By the end of that week, the whole settlement had taken sides, and the sides were ugly. Edna had a following: good people, scared people, people who'd buried their own and could not bear the thought of burying more. They didn't want Tamsin dead. I want to be fair to them because they were my neighbors and most of them were not bad. They wanted her gone, out past the line, where their children's safety wasn't a thing they had to take on faith from a grieving young alpha and a survivor with nothing to her name but a story. Send her on with food and a blessing and let her be someone else's mercy, Edna said, and a lot of heads nodded, and the terrible thing is that it wasn't even unreasonable. That was the worst of it. The cruel choice looked exactly like the careful one. It almost always does. And Rourke would not bend. He'd come into the hall in the mornings with his jaw set and the night's argument still on him, and he'd sit with her, and he'd let the whole pack see him sit with her, and I watched it cost him. An alpha rules because the pack lets him. That's the secret nobody tells you. The strength is real, but the permission is realer. And Rourke was spending his permission like a man who didn't believe in tomorrow, pouring it out on one thin, gray-eyed woman who had not, as far as anyone could see, asked him for any of it. "You're going to break yourself on this," I told him one night after she'd gone to the cold little room we'd cleared for her and it was just the 2 of us at the hearth. "You know that. They'll follow you a long way, Rourke. Your father bought you that much, but not forever, not for her. Why her? You don't even know her. You found her in the snow 8 days ago." He looked into the fire for a long time. "When my father was dying," he said finally, "everyone told me what to feel, how to grieve, how long, how loud. The whole pack had an opinion about my own heart. And the one thing nobody could tell me, the one thing I had to find out alone in the dark, was whether any of it, being Alpha, being his son, all of it, whether any of it was mine, or whether I was just doing what I was told to want. He turned to me. First time I've ever been sure something was mine, Ansel, is her. I can't explain it better than that. Everyone telling me to let her go is exactly the thing that tells me I can't. I'm tired of wanting what I'm allowed to want. I didn't have an answer. I'm a man who deals in things you can write down, and there is no writing that down. So I said the only true thing I had. Then you'd better be right about her, I said. Because if you're wrong, you won't bury one woman, you'll bury us all. And it'll be your name in my book under the heading I never want to use again. He nodded slowly. He wasn't a fool. He knew the stakes better than I did. I know, he said. I'm betting everything on a stranger's gray eyes, a tired ghost of a smile. Don't write that part down. Makes me sound like an idiot. I wrote it down. It was the truest thing he said all winter. What I didn't know that night, what none of us knew, what I'd give a great deal to be able to go back and tell that frightened, side-taking, sharp-tongued pack of mine, was that the gray was already coming. Not in Tamsin. Never in Tamsin. It was coming the way it always comes, slow and quiet and out of the dark on the far side of the burn, and it did not care whose name was in whose ledger, and it would be on us before the snow melted. And the only person in the whole valley who'd ever looked it in the face and lived was the one we were all so busy trying to send away. Tamsin earned her keep the hard way, which is the only way a person like her was ever going to be allowed to earn it. By midwinter she was strong enough to work, and she worked like a woman trying to pay off a debt nobody had agreed she owed. She was up before the cook fires. She hauled water with the bad-tempered mules and didn't complain when they bit her, which they did, because mules can smell a soft hand and she was determined not to be one. She mended. God, the woman could mend. She had a way with a needle that came, I think, from a place she didn't talk about, a household full of people whose clothes she'd kept whole, all of them gone now, and the skill left over in her fingers with nowhere to go. She patched things in our pack that had been torn for years. Nobody thanked her at first. She did it anyway. That was the whole of her. She did it anyway. I started keeping a second column in the ledger that winter. I never showed it to anyone. On the left I wrote what the pack said about her. On the right I wrote what she did. Edna says she's bad luck on the left. Tamsin sat up all night with the sick mule and it lived on the right. 3 families won't take bread she's touched on the left. She taught the Harrow girls to bank a fire so it holds till morning, and now their mother sleeps on the right. I thought if it ever came to it, if they ever put her out, I'd have the 2 columns to read aloud, and let the pack hear its own meanness next to her patience, and see how it sat with them. I never got to read it aloud. Things went a different way than I planned. They usually do. Here is the thing about endurance, though, the real kind, not the kind in the old stories where the hero grits his teeth and wins. Real endurance is ugly and boring, and it doesn't look like strength while it's happening. It looks like a thin woman hauling water at dawn for the 100th morning to people who step out of her path. It looks like getting bitten by the mule and going back to the mule. There's no glory in it. The glory is a thing other people decide to hang on it afterward if you live. Tamsin didn't endure beautifully. She endured the way a stone endures weather, which is to say, she just refused to be anywhere but where she was, until the weather got used to her. And slowly, the weather got used to her. It was the children first. It's always the children. They hadn't had 2 winters to grow their fear the way the grown ones had. Their fear was borrowed, worn loose, easy to set down. Wim took to her like she was warm and the rest of the world was cold, which for a 6-year-old was simply true. He'd trail her at the water hall. He'd save her things, a good pinecone, a feather, a stone with a hole worn through it that he was certain was lucky. She kept every one of them. I saw the collection later on the sill of that cold little room. The pinecone, the feather, the whole stone, lined up like the treasures they were. A woman who'd lost everyone she loved, keeping a child's pebbles like relics. You tell me what kind of curse does that? The grown ones came along behind their children the way grown ones do, grudging, watching to see who'd blink first. By the deep of winter, maybe half the pack would take bread she'd baked. That was the high water mark of Tamsin's welcome among us, and I want you to hold on to how thin it was, because it's going to matter very much how thin it was. Half a pack, grudging on a good day. That was all the ground she stood on. One bad week and the water would take it back. There was a night that turned more than the children, though, and I should set it down properly. Old Harrow, the grandmother, not the girls, took a lung fever in the worst cold of the year, the kind that kills the old as a matter of course, and the family did what families do, which was gather and grieve in advance and keep the fire high and wait. Tamsin heard of it at the water hall. She went to the door uninvited, which took more courage than walking into a fight, given what those weeks were, and the family didn't want her. The daughter-in-law actually put a hand on the doorframe to bar it, but the old woman's breathing had that wet drag to it that everyone in the room knew the meaning of, and Tamsin said, very quietly, "I have sat with a great many people who breathed like that. Some of them I lost, some of them I didn't. Let me try, and if I'm no help I'll go, and you'll be no worse off than you are now." They let her in, because despair will let anything in. She didn't do magic. I want to be honest about that, because the pack told it later like she'd done magic, and she hadn't. She propped the old woman half upright instead of flat, which eased the drag. She had them boil water and breathe the steam under a blanket, with a handful of something pine-smelling from her own scant stores in it. She kept the fire lower, not higher, because a fevered lung drowns faster in a hot, close room. That was the thing the family had wrong, the loving thing they'd had exactly backward, the high fire that was killing the woman they were trying to save. She sat up with her 3 nights running. She didn't sleep. On the 4th morning, old Harrow asked for broth, which is the body deciding to stay, and the wet drag was gone out of her breath. The daughter-in-law who'd barred the door with her hand walked Tamsin home in the dawn and didn't say anything for most of it. And then at the cold little room she said, "I was wrong about you," and Tamsin said, "You were afraid." It's not the same thing, which was more grace than the woman had earned, and went inside and slept for a day. After that the Harrows took her bread. After that a few more did. It's the closest thing to a turning the adults of that pack ever managed on their own, and it came not from her enduring or her mending, but from the thing she never advertised and never explained. That this woman the whole valley feared as the bringer of death had sat at more deathbeds than all the rest of us together, and had learned there, in the worst school there is, how to make a few of them not be deathbeds after all. The pack feared her for surviving. They never once stopped to wonder what surviving had taught her. They'd find out, just not in time to be grateful for it the easy way. And then there was Rourke. I'm an old man and I kept a ledger, not a love story, so you'll have to forgive how I tell this part. But I had a front row seat, and I'd be cheating you if I left it out. It built the way a fire builds in damp woods, slow, lot of smoke. You think it's not going to catch, and then all at once there's heat coming off it you can feel across the room. They didn't court. There was no time and no permission for courting. The pack was watching them both too closely. What they had was smaller than courting and harder to stop. It was a way of ending up in the same places. Rourke would find a reason to be wherever the work had put her. She'd find a reason to need the thing he happened to be carrying. They talked low, the way 2 people talk when half the settlement is pretending not to listen, and I caught pieces of it, and the pieces weren't romantic. That's what got me. They were just true. He told her about his father. She told him about Greywater, not the dying. She never told anyone the dying, but the before, the ordinary before. Her mother's songs and her brother's fighting, and the particular slant of light through the eastern trees where she'd grown up. She gave him her dead. That's a thing you only give a person you've decided to trust with the weight of you. I understood, watching it, that I was seeing something rarer than romance. I was seeing 2 people who'd each been alone in a crowd hand each other the loneliness, and find it lighter shared. There was one night. I'll give you one night because it's the one I think about. It was the longest dark of the year, the turning night, when by old custom the pack sits up together at the great hearth until the fires burn to coals and the year's said to turn over. Everyone was there. Even the families who wouldn't take her bread were there, because the turning night is the turning night and you don't break that for a quarrel. Tamsin sat at the edge, the way she always sat, near enough to be present and far enough to be forgotten. And Wim, who was supposed to be asleep, came padding out in his nightshirt and walked the whole length of the hall past his own mother and a dozen others, and climbed into Tamsin's lap like it was the most natural place in the world to be, and put his thumb in his mouth, and fell asleep against her. The hall got quiet, not a cruel quiet, a caught quiet, a whole pack realizing all at once that their most defenseless one had cast his vote and that children don't curl up trusting against things that are going to hurt them. Tamsin sat very still with the sleeping boy against her, and I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do. It crumpled, just for a second. The careful, braced, expecting a blow face she'd worn since the snow it went, and under it was a woman so starved for exactly this, for a warm child and a fire and a room full of people not actively wishing her gone, that she could hardly hold it. She bent her head over Wim's hair so no one would see. But I saw. And across the hall Rourke saw, and he didn't go to her. He was too wise for that in front of everyone, but he looked at her, and she looked up and caught him looking, and neither of them looked away, and the fire popped, and the year turned over. That's it, that's the whole of it. No grand declaration. A sleeping child and two people not looking away across a crowded room. I've written down a great many vows in my time, marriage vows, Alpha's oaths, deathbed promises. None of them ever said as much as those two not looking away. I closed the ledger that night and I thought maybe this works. Maybe the weather's got used to her for good. I am a foolish old man. The gray was already 3 days into the valley. We just didn't know its name yet. It started with Wim. Of course it started with Wim. I've turned that over 1,000 times, why the boy who loved her, why the one whose trust had cracked the pack open for her, and the only answer I've ever found is that the gray doesn't care what story you're in the middle of. It isn't cruel. Cruelty would at least mean it was paying attention. It's just weather. It comes where it comes. He went quiet first. A boy like Wim going quiet is the loudest thing in the world, but we were slow to hear it because a child being calm for once is a thing tired parents are grateful for, not frightened by. Then the cough. An ordinary cough. Every child in the valley had an ordinary cough that winter, the wood smoke and the cold make them. It meant nothing. His mother kept him in. Standard. Nobody worried. I didn't write it down. Why would I write down a child with a cough? Tamsin worried. She came to me, of all people, which tells you how things had shifted, that when she was afraid I was now a person she came to. And she found me at the long table, and she didn't sit. She stood over me with her hands knotted up against her chest the old way, the braced way, and she said, "How long has Wim been coughing?" 3 days, maybe. Children cough, Tamsin, it's winter. Is it dry or is it wet? How would I know? Dry, I think Edna's been. Has he gone off his food? I stopped, because he had. His mother had mentioned it, fond and unbothered, can't get a thing into him, he's at that age, and I'd thought nothing of it. And now this thin gray-eyed woman was standing over me asking the question with her whole body gone rigid, and I felt the floor of the winter tilt under me. "Tamsin," I said, "what do you know that I don't?" She told me. She told me the gray didn't come the way we thought it came. It didn't ride in on a stranger. We'd had it wrong from the start, our whole careful murderous wisdom turning families into the snow. We'd had the shape of the thing wrong. It came up out of the ground in a wet thaw, she said, out of the standing water, the snow melt that pooled where the cattle had wintered. It had come up at Greywater out of the low meadow after a warm spell broke the ice early, and it always started the same way. Quiet. Then a dry cough. Then a child off its food. Children first because they were small. She had watched it begin 2 winters before. She had watched it begin on her own youngest brother, who'd gone quiet and coughed and gone off his food, and the grown ones had said, "Children cough, it's winter." And by the time anyone understood, it was in the water, everyone was drinking, and there was no stopping it. "We had a thaw," she said. Her voice was terrible and level. 8 days ago, I felt it. I thought I let myself think it was nothing because I wanted it to be nothing because I'm so tired, Ansel, of being the woman who brings the gray into the room. But it's here. It's not me. It was never me. It's in your low meadow and it's in your water, and it has started on that boy. And if I'm wrong, I am the cruelest fool who ever lived. And if I'm right, we have maybe 10 days before it's in every child in this valley. I looked at her for a long moment. You understand what you're telling me, I said quietly. You understand what they'll do with it. She did, we both did. She had stood up in the middle of the only fragile half-welcome she'd ever earned and said, "The thing you've all feared I'd bring is here." It didn't matter that she was saying it to warn us. Fear doesn't hear the second half of a sentence. The pack would hear the gray is here and Tamsin from Greywater in the same breath, and it would do what frightened things do. The careful thing for her would have been to say nothing. To let the cough be a cough a few more days, to keep her warm room and her hold stone and the man who didn't look away, to protect the small good things she'd built. Nobody would ever have known she'd known. She told the truth instead. She told it knowing exactly what it would cost her, because somewhere east of here she had once stayed quiet and grateful while a child went off his food, and she had buried that child, and she was never ever going to do it again, not for warmth, not for safety, not for love, not for anything. That's the heaviest thing a person can do, not die for someone. Lots of people will die for someone in the hot rush of a moment. The heavy thing is to ruin yourself for someone slowly, on purpose, in cold blood, when staying quiet would have cost you nothing and saved you everything. That's what she did. Write that down, I told myself. You keep the book, write it down right. Tamsin told the truth when the truth would cost her everything. I wrote it down. It's the line I'm proudest of in 31 years of keeping the book. It went exactly as badly as she knew it would. We went to work first, the two of us, and he believed her inside a minute. Because he was not a fool, and because by then he'd have believed her if she said the sky was green. He acted like an alpha should. He had the low meadow roped off. He had the water hall moved to the high spring, the clean one, before dawn. He had Wim's family kept apart from the rest, gentle but firm, and he had the whole pack called to the hall to hear it. And he made one mistake. One. He let Tamsin stand beside him when he told them. I understood why. He wanted her credited. He wanted the pack to see that the woman they'd grudged was the one who'd seen it coming, who might yet save their children. He wanted to give her that after everything. It was a generous mistake. It was the most loving thing he could have done, and it was the worst thing he could have done, and both of those are true, and I have never been able to untangle them. Because here is what the pack saw. They saw their alpha stand up and say the gray is in the valley with the survivor of Greywater at his right hand. And Edna, who was not a bad woman, I keep saying it because it keeps being true, Edna stood up with her face white as ash and said the thing that was already in every frightened heart in that hall. 2 winters of nothing, she said, 2 winters since Greywater. And then she comes over the line and lives in our hall and bakes our bread and holds our children, and now the gray is in our water. And you want us to thank her for warning us. Her voice broke. She had grandchildren. You brought it here, Rourke. You carried it in your own arms, and we told you. We told you, and you called us afraid. Well, look at little Wim. Were we afraid, or were we right? And the hall, my neighbors. The same people who'd gone quiet and caught when a sleeping child chose her on the turning night, the hall turned. You could feel it turn, like the year on the longest dark, except this turned the wrong way, toward the cold. Half a pack of grudging welcome, gone in the space of one frightened woman's grief, exactly as Tamsin had known it would go, which is why she'd been so careful to stand at the edge all winter, near enough to be present, far enough to be forgotten. She'd known the edge was the only safe place, and Rourke, loving her, had walked her into the center, into the light, where everyone could see her to blame her. Rourke roared them down. He was the alpha. He could do that for one night. He stood in front of her and he told them the truth, that the gray came from the ground, from the thaw, that she had not brought it, that she had seen it, that she was the only soul in the valley who'd faced it and lived and might know how to fight it, and that the first one of them to lay a hand on her would answer to him. And they fell silent, because he was the alpha and the alpha had decided, and fear falls in behind a decision. I told you that. But fear falls in behind. It doesn't go away, it waits. That night Tamsin came to me at the long table, when the hall had emptied, and it was just the old man and his book again. And she stood the way she always stood, braced, hands at her chest. And she said the thing I'd been dreading since I watched the room turn. I have to go. Tamsin. Listen to me, quiet, level, the terrible levelness she got when she decided something true and hard. He spent everything to hold them off me tonight, everything, Ansel. His father's name, his own. There's nothing left in the cup. And the children are going to keep getting sick. That's not a thing he can stop. It's in the water. It's already too late to stop it. All we can do now is fight it where it lands. And every child that sickens, they'll look at me. You know they will. As long as I'm here, every cough in this valley is a stone in their hands with my name on it. And the day a child dies, and one will, Ansel, one always does. I've never seen it not the day a child dies, they'll come for me, and he'll stand in front of me again. And that time they won't fall silent. That time they'll go through him. And I will not, her voice finally cracked, the only time it cracked the whole long speech. I will not be the reason that good man's own pack tears him apart. I came over the line with nothing. I'll leave with nothing. It's a fair trade. It's the only thing I have to give him. I can take the stone out of their hands by taking myself out of the valley. You'd save them, I said slowly, by leaving the one person who knows how to save them. She flinched, because that was the trap and she knew it, and it was the cruelest trap the gray ever set, crueler than the dying. I'll tell you everything I know first, she said. Tonight. You write it down, you write everything down, you're good at it, the best I ever met. The water, the thaw, how to nurse them, what helps, what's wasted effort, how to keep the well ones from the sick ones. Everything I learned watching my whole world die. You put it in your book and you fight it with my knowledge and without my face. And that's better, Ansel, that's better. A book can't be blamed. A book can't be torn apart at a child's funeral. I'll be a day's walk west by morning. Tell him. She stopped. She couldn't think what to tell him. There wasn't a thing you could put in a sentence. Tell him I didn't look away either, she said finally. He'll know what it means. And she sat down across from me, this woman everyone had warned the alpha away from. And through the rest of that long night she gave me, line by terrible line, everything she'd paid for in blood east of the burn, every hard-won scrap of how to fight the thing that had emptied a pack of 200 souls, so that we might fight it without her. I filled 11 pages. My hand didn't shake once. It was the most important thing I ever wrote, and I knew it while I wrote it, and a man writes steady when he knows. She left before dawn. I watched her go up the ridge trail in the gray light with everything she owned on her back, which was almost nothing, a child's pinecone and a hold stone among it. And she did not look back at the hall, and she did not flinch, and she walked west into the cold the way she did everything, which was anyway, and behind her, all through the sleeping settlement, in a dozen warm beds where a dozen children lay with the first dry cough just starting in their chests. The gray was already awake, and turning over and beginning. Rourke found the room empty at first light and the 11 pages on my table, and he read them standing up, and I watched a man understand in 1 minute that the woman he loved had ruined herself on purpose to save him the trouble of choosing her again. He didn't shout. I'd braced for shouting. He set the pages down very carefully, squared the edges, the way you handle a thing that matters when your hands want to do something violent and you won't let them. Then he said, "Which trail?" "West, hours ago, Rourke. She'll be a long way." "Which trail, Ansel?" I told him. I'm not sorry I told him. I'd spent 11 years being the man who let someone walk west into the cold and never went after them, and I was done being that man. And if Rourke wanted to be a better one, then, by God, I was going to point the way. But he didn't go. That's the part that surprised me. He got as far as the door with his coat half on, and he stopped, and he stood there in the gap with the cold coming in, and I watched the whole terrible arithmetic of being an alpha move across his face. Because behind him, in the settlement, the gray was waking. Wim's cough had gone from dry to something else in the night. Two of the Harrow girls were off their food. The thing Tamsin had warned of was no longer a warning. It was here, in the water, in the children, and an alpha does not get to ride west after the woman he loves while his pack starts to die. That's not a choice he's allowed. The pack is the choice. The pack is always the choice. His father had taught him that, and his father had been right, and it was the cruelest right thing in the world. He stood in the door a long time. "Go," I said, "old fool that I am. Go after her, Rourke. I'll hold it here. I've got her pages. I sat at her elbow 3 nights. I know what she knows near enough. I'm too old to ride and too useless to nurse, but I can read aloud and I can boil water and I can keep your pack from doing the wrong loving thing with a high fire. Go. Bring her back. We need the woman, not the book. I was wrong. The book isn't enough. A book can't sit up with a dying child and know. Go get her." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. He'd known me his whole life as the cautious one, the put her in the snow one, and here I was shoving him out the door toward the very thing I'd warned him off. "You changed your mind," he said. "No," I said. "I just stopped being afraid of the wrong thing. Took me 11 years. Go before it takes you as long." He went. I'll tell you about those days while he was gone, because I lived them. And because they're the answer to the question the whole valley had been asking all winter. What is she? Blessing or curse? And the answer turned out to be neither. The answer turned out to be that she was the only one of us who'd done her grieving in advance and come out the far side knowing how to fight. The gray took the valley the way she said it would. Children first. By the second day there were 9 of them down, and by the third, 14, and the dry coughs were turning wet, and the little ones were going quiet, and the parents were doing all the wrong loving things, the high fires, the heaped blankets, the closed-up rooms. Because that is what love does when it's frightened and ignorant. It smothers the thing it's trying to save. And I went house to house with 11 pages in my hand, and I read them aloud, and I made people do the opposite of their instincts. Prop them up, don't lay them flat. Lower the fire. Open the room a crack to the cold. Yes, I know it's cold. The cold is not the enemy tonight. Clean water from the high spring only, boiled, even the water you wash in. Keep the well children clear away from the sick ones in another house with someone who doesn't go between. Steam with pine. Broth when they'll take it. And the day they ask for it unprompted is the day they've decided to live. So don't despair before then. It worked, not like magic, like arithmetic. The houses that did what the pages said lost fewer than the houses that didn't, and the word of that spread faster than the gray. And by the 4th day, even Edna was doing the opposite of her instincts with her own grandchildren, lowering the fire with her hands shaking, hatting it, doing it anyway. Anyway. I'd learned the word from watching Tamsin, and now the whole pack was learning it, learning to act against the screaming in their own chests, because a survivor's 11 pages told them to. And every house I left, somebody said some version of the same thing. Where did this come from? And I said Tamsin. Every time, I made a point of it. I would not let them have the medicine without the name. This is Tamsin's. The propping up is Tamsin's. The low fire that's keeping your boy breathing is Tamsin's. The woman you drove west 4 days ago is the reason your child is going to see the spring. I said it in house after house until the saying of it wore a groove, until I watched it land in people's faces. The slow horror of the thing they'd done sitting down next to the desperate gratitude for the thing she'd left them, and the two of them not able to look at each other. Edna found me on the 4th night. She'd been up 3 days with her grandchildren, and she looked 100 years old, and she said, without any preamble, the way you say a thing you can't hold in your mouth 1 second longer. "We have to get her back. Rourke's gone for her." "Is he?" Something broke open in her face. "Then God send he finds her. Ansel, Ansel," I stood in that hall and I said she brought it. I said, look at little Wim, were we afraid or were we right? And little Wim is alive tonight because I'm doing what her pages say, and she couldn't finish it. She put her hand over her mouth. There's no finishing a sentence like that. I didn't try to comfort her. Some things a person has earned the right to sit inside, and Edna had earned that one, and the kindest thing I could do was let her have it. When she comes back, I said, you'll have a chance to say so to her, not to me, save it for her. She won't come back, Edna whispered. Would you, after what we did? And I thought about a woman who reached for a fire on the second night of her own near death, who reached for warmth on the off chance the world had any left to give her, who'd kept a child's pinecone like a relic, and told the truth when the truth cost her everything. She'll come back, I said. She's not the kind that stays gone. God help her, she's exactly the kind that comes back. He found her on the second morning, a day and a half west, and she was already walking east. He told me this part later, and I've set it down as close to his words as I could, because it's not mine to embellish. She was coming back on her own. She'd gone a day and a half toward whatever was west, and she'd stopped on a ridge at dusk and looked back at the smudge of valley she'd left, and she'd thought about 14 children with a dry cough turning wet and a roomful of frightened parents heaping on blankets that would drown them, and she could not do it. She could not walk west knowing what she knew. She told me she was leaving to take the stone out of their hands, and she'd meant it, and it had even been wise. And she'd gotten a day and a half before the other thing in her, the thing that had made her go to old Harrow's barred door, turned her around on the ridge and started her walking back toward the people who'd cast her out, to die with them or save them, but not to be safe and apart while they suffered. She was incapable of it. That incapacity was the whole of her. It was the thing the pack had feared, and the thing that was about to save them, and they were the same thing. They were always the same thing. So when Rourke came up the trail half frozen and wild-eyed, what he found was not a woman to be rescued. He found a woman already coming home under her own power, and he stopped his horse in the middle of the trail and got down and just stood there. And she stopped too, 20 feet off, braced the old way, hands at her chest, not sure even now whether the world meant her good or ill. They drove me out, she said, carefully testing it. I know. And I'm walking back into it. I know. Why are you here, Rourke? And he told me he said, and I believe him because it's exactly the kind of plain true thing he'd say, because everyone told me to let you go, again. And I'm still not going to. That's the whole of it, Tamsin. I'm a simple man about exactly one thing and you're it. And then, because he was who he was. Also, the pack's dying and they need you, and I'd be lying if I pretended that wasn't true, and you'd never trust me again if I lied to make the moment prettier. They need you. And I need you both. I won't rank them. Come home. She came home. She didn't run into his arms. I want to be truthful. It wasn't that kind of story, and they weren't that kind of people. She crossed the 20 feet and she stood close enough to feel his warmth, reaching, the old reaching, toward heat on the chance there was some left for her. And she put her forehead down against his chest for one breath, just one, and his arms came up around her slow, like a door opening that he was leaving open. And they stood like that on the cold trail for exactly as long as two people who'd both been alone in a crowd needed to stand, which was not long. Because there were children dying east of them, and they both knew it. Then she stepped back and said, "How many are down? The truth, all of it. Already the healer, already counting." And he told her, and they got on the horse and they rode east into it, the woman everyone had warned him away from and the man who'd chosen her anyway, going back together into the thing that had taught her everything she knew. I have to tell you about Wim's night, because it was the worst of the 9, and because it was the one that showed the pack, finally and past all argument, what they had nearly thrown away into the snow. The boy went over the edge on the 6th night. He'd been holding propped up, low fire, the steam, all of it. And then around midnight his breathing changed to the thing that has no good name, the shallow gray drag, and his mother started screaming for Tamsin in a voice I hope never to hear again. By the time I got there on my bad knee, the room was full of the smell of fear and pine steam, and Wim was the color of wood ash, and his mother was being held back from heaping every blanket in the house onto him by Tamsin's own hand, gentle and immovable. "No, you'll drown him, trust me. I have done this, trust me." And then Tamsin did the thing I'd never seen in the pages because it wasn't in the pages, it was only in her, the part you can't write down. She climbed onto the cot behind that dying boy and sat him up against her own chest, the way she'd held him on the turning night when he'd cast his little vote for her, and she put her mouth near his ear and she talked to him. Low, steady. She named the things he loved. The pinecone, the feather, the stone with the hole worn through that he'd given her, that she'd kept on the windowsill all the long way west and back. She had it in her fist. She'd carried it into the room, and she pressed it into his slack little hand and folded his fingers over it and said, "You gave me this for luck, Wim, and it worked. It brought me back. So you have to hold it now and let it bring you back too. That's the rule, that's how the stone works. You can't quit on a thing that's already saved one of us." All night. She breathed slow on purpose against his back so his body would have a rhythm to borrow, the way you teach a frightened animal to calm by being calm against it. And his mother knelt at the cot with her face in the blanket, and I stood in the door with no use for my hands, and the fire stayed low, 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 against every instinct in that room. Dawn came gray and then it came gold, and somewhere in the gold Wim took a breath that wasn't the drag, a real one, a whole one, a breath with a bottom to it, and then another, and his mother lifted her head, and Tamsin, who had not moved or slept in 9 hours, looked down at the top of his head and let herself shake, finally, just once, all over, the way you shake when you've been holding a life shut up inside your own arms by main force and it has decided, against the odds, to stay. "Broth," she said when she could speak. "When he wakes, don't push it, he'll ask." He asked by noon. He's asking for things still 40 years on. One of them he named Tamsin. She fought the gray for 9 days, and she saved most of them, and she could not save all of them, and I will not pretend to you that she could. She told me that in the long night of the 11 pages. One always does, I've never seen it not. I'd written it down and I hadn't believed it, the way you don't believe a thing until it has a name and a face. Its name was Sephi. 3 years old, the youngest of the down children, too small and too far gone before Tamsin ever reached the valley. She'd taken sick the first day, in the first house, before any of us knew what we were looking at. And by the time the pages and then the woman herself came, the gray was too deep in her small chest, and there are things even a survivor with 9 days of fighting in her cannot undo. Tamsin sat with that child the last night the same as she'd sat with old Harrow, the same as she'd sat, I understood, with her own brother 2 winters east of here. And she did everything right and the child died anyway, in the gray hour before dawn. And Tamsin came out of that house and sat down in the snow and did not get up for a long time, and no one in the valley dared go near her, because what comfort is there? What could any of us possibly say? We who had driven her out, and then begged her back to watch a child die in her arms. I went near her, old fool, bad knee and all. I lowered myself down into the snow beside her and I didn't say anything wise because I'd learned that much. I just sat. After a while she said, not to me exactly, to the dark, "I always think this one I'll keep," and then. And I said, "I know," and I didn't, not the way she did, but I knew enough to not pretend I knew more. And she let me sit there, that was all. That was the whole of what I had to give her, and it turned out to be the thing she needed, which was to not do the gray hour alone for once in her life. That child was the only one we lost after Tamsin came home. One, where Greywater had lost 200. One, where without her 11 pages and her propped-up children and her low fires and her terrible hard-won knowing, we'd have lost. I've done the arithmetic, I keep the book, I can't help doing the arithmetic, we'd have lost dozens. We'd have lost Wim, who's alive and grown now and has children of his own, one of whom is named Tamsin, which is a thing that makes the old woman pretend to be annoyed and fool exactly no one. But we lost Sephi, and I set it down here on purpose, the one we lost, because the easy story would leave her out and Tamsin would never forgive an easy story. The gray is weather. It comes where it comes. You fight it with everything you have and everything one woman bled to learn, and you still don't save them all, and the measure of a person isn't whether they save them all. It's whether they keep sitting down at the next bed knowing they won't. Tamsin kept sitting down. She's still sitting down. There's no curse on this earth that does that. They didn't make a ceremony of it. Of her staying, I mean, of the pack and her. There was no grand moment where the settlement gathered and begged her pardon and welcomed her in. I think you might want one. I think I wanted one. Watching it, my whole storyteller's heart wanted Edna to stand up in the hall and confess, and the pack to weep and Tamsin to forgive them all in a golden light. It didn't happen like that. Real reconciliation is shabbier and slower and truer than that. What happened is that one morning in the thaw, the safe thaw, the next one, the one that came up clean because we'd kept the low meadow roped a full year, Tamsin went to the water hall like she had all that first hard winter, braced, expecting the old coldness, and the Harrow daughter-in-law just fell into step beside her and took one of the buckets, and they hauled water together and didn't talk about anything, and that was it. That was the welcome. A shared bucket. Nobody stepped out of her path anymore. That was how you knew. Edna did say her piece eventually. Privately, the way these things are properly done. I wasn't there for it and I won't invent it. Some words aren't for the ledger. I'll only tell you that afterward the two of them were often seen at the same fire. The woman who'd said, "Look at little Wim. Were we afraid or were we right?" And the woman who was the answer to that question. And they made their peace in the slow, ordinary way of people who have to keep living in the same small valley, which is the only kind of peace that ever actually holds. And Rourke and Tamsin, well, you know how that goes near enough. You've known since the longest dark when a sleeping child cast his vote. They were quiet about it the way they were quiet about everything that mattered. There came a day, the following autumn, when she stopped being the survivor who lived among us and started being his, fully, openly, in front of the whole pack. And the whole pack, the same pack, stood witness. And not one soul warned him away, because they'd all learned the one thing it had cost a child's life and a winter of cruelty to teach them, which is that the people the frightened want to cast out are very often the people the frightened cannot survive without. I keep the book still. I'm older now than I ever expected to get, and my hand shakes at things other than fear these days, and the pencil I'm using is one Wim's daughter sharpened for me, too long, because she's heard the story of how I keep them too long and she's decided it's a tradition. Maybe it is now. Things become traditions when somebody decides to love the reason behind them. I've read the line back 100 times, the first one, the one I wrote with a shaking hand the night Rourke carried her in. Whatever happens to her happens to me first. I used to think it was a young man's recklessness. I understand it differently now. It wasn't recklessness. It was the truest thing he ever said, and he said it before he knew it was true, the way the best vows always come out ahead of the heart that has to grow into them. Everyone warned the alpha away from her. I warned him hardest of all. Put it in the book. I want it there. I want the last word in this account to be the truth about the man who kept it. I stood in the gate with a lamp and told him to leave her in the snow. He chose her anyway. And the rest of us, every frightened, grieving, side-taking, well-meaning, wrong one of us, we spent that winter learning to be brave enough to follow where his stubbornness had already gone. Some of us learned it in time. One of us learned it too late, and her name was Sephi, and I will not let even a happy ending lift her name off this page. The thaw is coming again now. They always come. The gray is weather, and weather returns, and one of these springs the low meadow will go warm too early, and a child somewhere will go quiet and off its food, and will be ready, because we have 11 pages and we have the woman who wrote them, gone gray now herself at the temples, still the first one to sit down at the worst bed in the valley. I asked her once if she was afraid of it coming back. She was mending something by the fire. She didn't look up, she said.